Governor DeWine takes a stand against Weed Light. Welcome to Columbus on the Record. I'm Mike Thompson. Governor DeWine has long wanted to crack down, even ban, unregulated cannabis products, things like Delta 8 and other THC products sold in gas stations and convenience stores. They give users a high, but not as powerful as marijuana. State legislators have done nothing on the issue. So this week, DeWine took the unusual step of issuing an executive order banning intoxicating hemp products for 90 days. He says it's an emergency because many of the products are aimed at kids.
If you look at these, I think it's pretty easy to see. This is the candy, and this is the intoxicating hemp. Designed clearly to mimic candy, designed clearly to entice children to consume these. Keep in mind that these are being sold and there is no check. There's no check on age. Anyone can walk in and buy one of these.
DeWine says he hopes this ban will prompt the legislature to pass a law regulating the products. Sarah Donaldson, these have been legal for 7 years since the federal government made them legal. But now it's an emergency. How does the governor justify that?
So I think he justifies it because that's what his lawyers have told him he's able to do now. I asked him about that because in January 2024, he said that he could not do anything on the intoxicating hemp issue. So these are hemp products that were, like you said, federally legalized. They contain psychoactive ingredients like Delta 8, THC, THCA. It's all the stuff you're seeing at the front counter of gas stations. Now he says he went back to his lawyers and they say he can do it under what's called an adulterated consumer product emergency because he says these products are not what they say they are. Because
they look so much like candy.
That's his argument, but you are talking about, you've heard from opponents of this, folks who are selling these hemp products who say that A, the federal government has made hemp legal, B, the state government has made hemp legal, and C, you've got a broad range of products, and DeWine is picking the worst of them.
Laura, usually he defers to the legislature, the governor does. This time, I mean, this is like an executive order. This is out of, Donald Trump's playbook, being bold.
Yeah, but at the same time, he asked them to act a year ago, and nothing has happened. And, there's a whole wide variety of these products. There are the candies that he's talking about. And the ones that he held up, each gummy has 100 milligrams of THC in them. I mean, that's a lot of THC. But what he's not doing is carving out separate, the Seventh Sons Brewing of the world, where they're making these THC seltzers, which are sold in tap rooms and in wine shops where the IDs are checked.
Yep. Terry.
My understanding is the state Senate in April did pass 33-0, a similar bill from Senator Dr. Huffman, and also Speaker Matt Huffman is not a fan of these kind of products, but there's a few new members of the House who are kind of standing up for these convenience stores who like the profit margins on these. But the real problem is these are aimed at kids, teens, young people whose minds are not as developed, more vulnerable to these kind of products. So I think the legislature will do something on it.
But Stanley, why haven't they done something to date? I mean, they talk about further regulating marijuana. They talk about regulating hemp products, but yet year after year goes by and they don't do it. You have to think there's some powerful interests in lawmakers' ears saying, leave us alone.
Well, I think that we're definitely going to see some action now because the governor went and did the executive order. I mean, I applaud the governor for taking the step. I hope that this will encourage the legislator to also go through and try to make some legislation that can actually impact this. At the end of the day, Ohioans' kids are safer because of this executive order, and it does need regulation. We need to be thoughtful about smoke shops. We also need to be thoughtful about where these are sold as well.
And the Central Ohio Poison Center has seen a significant jump among young people coming in there with problems related to these kind of products. So I think the interest is building, and again, there's a few people in the House, relatively new members, who are trying to defend these convenience store operators, but their profit margins doesn't outweigh the kids' safety.
Did the governor offer some hard evidence of how many kids are going into the gas station and buying those nerdies?
I don't know that there is that good evidence because the gas stations don't have to keep track of that. Some of these stores, these, holistic wellness stores, they say that they do keep track of the people who they're selling to. But for the most part, there's some self-regulation going on, but not really. I do think one of the other interests here that is really important to point to is the marijuana industry. The marijuana industry wants to see regulations of hemp because they've had to go through all the rigmarole to have dispensaries. They had to install cameras. It was a lot of work for them to get to that point, and they're taxed much more heavily than these hemp products.
And it's competition. You can
Sure.
get a smaller high, but you still get high with these things, right?
Yeah, but I think that the hemp drink manufacturers, they also say that they want to have some reasonable regulations and some oversight. They welcome that, for sure. I think it's not that hard to send a 12-year-old secret shopper into one of these gas stations to pick this stuff up.
Well, I had no idea how prolific I pay at the pump. I don't go into the gas station. I refuse to go into the gas station and stand behind the cigarette buyers and the lottery players. So apparently they're everywhere now in convenience stores. I had no idea. I mean,
I'm an avid energy drink drinker, which is
Okay.
another one that maybe, who knows, could be banned. Who knows? But it's become very prolific, and I think you'll hear from folks. Although hemp was legalized in 2018, these products became especially prominent in Ohio when cannabis was legalized because there are not marketing and advertising regulations on some of them, and they advertise themselves as it's basically cannabis. And you said, some of these products can cause an even greater high than what you're buying at the dispensary because again, the dispensary is under stringent regulations, and like Laura said, one gummy might be more than a serving size.
so is the compromise, Terry? You can sell these, but they got to be behind the counter. Some stores, everything's locked up now, even underwear in some stores.
Well, there's clearly some legislators, including Speaker Huffman, who's much more an absolutist and wanting to tighten everything down. So we'll see how it works out. But the fact that the Senate's already done something tells you the votes are there. It's just a matter of overcoming a handful of these members, relatively new, who are hearing from some local sellers in their district. They don't want to lose the profit margin.
But the end of the day, the issue continues to be that it's just too accessible. And also we need to make sure that there's an age requirement to it because currently there's not even that. So how can we make sure that we're regulating this so, again, kids do not get impacted by it?
All right. Former Congressman Tim Ryan continues to fuel speculation that he is planning a political comeback. Ryan posted to social media a selfie of him with political strategists outside a restaurant in Dublin. The tweet said, "Great dinner last night with some of the best political strategists in America. Lots of fun ahead." Ryan still has not made a decision on a run for governor. Amy Acton wants to know. She's the only major Democrat in the race right now. Stanley Gates, what do you think's going on here? Is he just really considering getting in the race, or is he just stringing us along? What's going on?
So I'm a sports fan. We like to call this a pump fake. And unfortunately,
He's a former quarterback.
he's also a former quarterback, and so maybe he's going to do a run that we're just not expecting. But I implore him to make this decision hastily. At the end of the day, Republicans have had their guy since May. And at this point, he did the self-imposed deadline of September 30th. And that is 10 days from just now. And so it's time to make this act. I think at the end of the day, Ohioans want to see who's going to come out, and we need to make sure that we're prepared for it too.
Terry.
And if he was really going to run, he'd want to get in it sooner because he's got to raise a lot of money both for a primary and for the general election. So I think he's just straying along. And he's had a long history in these 20 plus years in Congress in faking interest in running statewide and then folding his cards. So it's kind of normal for Tim Ryan.
In the past, though, he was a congressman. So for him to run statewide, say for governor, which was talked about a lot, he would have had to basically give up his seat and risk losing his office. And now he doesn't have to do that. He's got a lobbying career, apparently, and he's a consulting career that's pretty lucrative from what we understand. But
Right. I think that in his 20 years in Congress, his seat was safe, and he toyed with the idea of running statewide, but never pulled the trigger on that. And then, his seat was no longer safe, and so that's when we saw him run for U.S. Senate. I think it's time for Tim Ryan to either put up or shut up because, like Stanley says, if the Democrats are going to have a primary, they need to get going on it.
I know, Sarah, supporters of Amy Acton are frustrated. They want him to make a decision. They want him to stay out, but they want him to make a decision, and so she can raise money and solidify her support.
Sure, of course. And, you know, you had a bit of a will he, won't he situation with Sherrod Brown, who now says he's running for senator. Will he, won't he run for governor? Will he, won't he run for Senate? So the Democrats have been kind of dealing with that statewide. And of course, like Stanley said, the Republicans have, you know, shown what they say is a ticket of unity. They have basically squashed any idea of a primary, and there were potential primary candidates in, I mean, Attorney General Dave Yost had declared he was running and then dropped out, and, you know, Lieutenant Governor Jim Tressel wasn't even really given, it's not that he wasn't given the chance, he could have jumped in, but there wasn't time for that because Ramaswamy had the party behind him.
Speaking of unity, I have to believe there are talks happening between the Acton camp and the Tim Ryan camp, if he's serious about running, about teaming up, with one of them being governor, one of them being lieutenant governor. You would assume that Ryan would not settle for lieutenant governor.
No, I don't think that Tim Ryan would settle for being lieutenant governor. I think that that's a long shot. And again, you know, the stakes are too high. And at this point, we need to be more aligned. But this is also the challenge that a lot of folks continue to talk about with the Democratic Party. There's no alignment. The Republican Party continues to show that they are aligned, and Democrats seem to continue to follow and not show up for the moment.
And there's a thing called money, and he's right now making a lot of money representing natural gas and crypto, both of which would not play well in a Democrat primary. But does he want to give that up when he's now living in New Albany, or excuse me, Plain City, Dublin area, enjoying the good life? I think he wants to focus on his family and son.
Stanley, a lot of people make point of how he works for the natural gas industry, that he ran a very moderate race when he ran against J.D. Vance, saying he was a Trump Democrat, basically. It may not work in a primary, but that's the only way you're going to get elected in Ohio as a Democrat in the general, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. But at the same time, you know, we need to now decide what are the values of the Democratic Party. And so I think it continues to be a conversation that I think Ohio Democratic Party, Tim Ryan, and others need to continue to have.
Bottom line, who has the better chance of beating Vivek Ramaswamy? The newcomer, Amy Acton, a lot of goodwill, some baggage from COVID, or Tim Ryan, who's run statewide. And
Well, can either one of them really raise the money to be competitive? And also, what baggage does each one of them have? So it could be an interesting race, but if you can't raise the money, you'd be another version of either Rob Birch for oldie people like me or Nan Whaley.
all right. Nothing gets viewers to turn the channel faster than a discussion about inside millage. But what if I told you that inside millage keeps your property taxes high? Well, now we have your attention. The House this week passed a bill that changes how property tax bills are calculated when home values rise. It also passed a bill that would allow county commissioners to roll back property tax increases if they determine the taxing agency is collecting too much money. Both bills goes to the Senate. It's all part of a concerted effort to cut or at least limit property taxes. A proposed amendment to ban property taxes completely could be on next November's ballot. Laura Bischoff, the bottom line question that people want to know: will this lower my property tax bills if I'm a homeowner? And school officials and others want to know, will this keep me from getting the revenue I need?
Maybe TBD.
Yeah.
It also would depend. There's two bills, and you know, one would affect like 240 districts in some manner. Another would affect a larger portion of them, and it also would depend on what your county commission budget committees end up doing. You know, what this isn't is a comprehensive fix. And you know, I've been covering the legislature since 2001, and back when I first arrived in Columbus, school funding was a hot and heavy topic back then, and it's remained so.
Is there a comprehensive fix, Sarah? I mean, it's so complicated.
I mean, I think that there are probably ideas of a comprehensive fix that maybe different lawmakers look at it differently, but I don't know that that's on the table right now. I think that lawmakers kind of nod at the edges in the budget, and the bills that were passed earlier this week, those were replicative of two pieces that DeWine vetoed in the budget. You know, Senate President Rob McCauley has talked about the fact that he feels that the system is broken, but like none of this is providing immediate direct tax relief, which is what the Democrats say they want to do. And of course, they're in the super minority in the legislature. But I mean, I don't know, it's tough to say. And does that stop the train that is this, idea of getting rid of property taxes?
The key important number is $20 billion, not million, $20 billion. And unless the state of Ohio can win a lottery ticket, $20 billion every year to make up for the money, an easy solution is not there. And also, if you remember a few weeks back when we were on the show, you made the point of your tax bill. In 14 different subdivisions here are drawing out money. There's so many levies over so many years that have been passed. That's part of the problem. And it really goes back before Laura was even at the State House to when Vern Rife and Jim Rhodes were there in the 70s mainly. Local government said we need more money for children's services, for MRDD, for mental health. So rather than raise state taxes, sales tax or income tax, they said we'll give local units of government more flexibility. Well, now the bills come due.
So, but meanwhile, property owners are seeing their tax bills really go up high because the home values are increasing, Stanley, and they don't want to hear that it's complicated, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what you're hearing right now, and also the reason that this conversation continues to happen. The governor has had his work group come out, but I think at the end of the day, the bottom line for residents of Ohio is I just want some kind of break. And I think that we need to figure that out. As Terry mentioned, I mean, we got into this situation because the state imposed those things and schools had to figure out a way to be able to raise funds. And now we're in this case where they have to continue to do this just to be able to support themselves in the midst of school funding cuts too. And so we need to make sure that we're also supporting the kids and also the social services that we have available too.
This would be a hard, comprehensive plan would be a hard thing to pass. But Laura, we've seen casinos, we've seen marijuana, the lawmakers sit on their hands until the voters had a chance to weigh in, and then they were forced to adopt what the voters wanted. Is that going to happen again?
I mean, that's the risk. And if we do away with property taxes via a ballot issue, which that's like saying, hey, everybody, you want to have 3-day weekends? It sounds great, right? I think it's very appealing, and if it gets on the ballot, I think it could actually pass. And then we're going to have a big, giant mess. And you are correct, going to the ballot, when the lawmakers are hesitant to act on a controversial or a tough issue, oftentimes it's the voters who say, we want this.
I will say on the flip side, though, if it does make it to the ballot, you are going to see the strangest coalition of people against this. It's going to be a very wide coalition because schools are going to be against this. Police departments are going to be against this. Like, it's this wide coalition that's like, we get our funds from property taxes. And lawmakers are also freaking out because there has been this long concerted effort to get rid of the income tax, and that is what Vivek Ramaswamy is running his campaign on. Governor DeWine does not seem like he wants to get rid of the income tax, although it was flattened this year, and you can't eliminate all taxes and still have government services.
And Stanley, whoever is running for governor is going to have to take a stand on this if it's on the ballot. We're not sure it's going to get on the ballot, but if it's on the ballot, it's going to be on the ballot with their names, and they're going to have to say, do they support it or not?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it has a really good chance of getting on the ballot. I think that we're going to hear a lot more of it over the next year. It's not going away. And I do think that definitely the candidates for governor are going to have a strong position on this. Again, at the end of the day, Ohioans want to know, what are you going to do to help me and making sure that I have some kind of relief for the rising property taxes that I'm paying?
All right. Critics and the Ohio Supreme Court have said property taxes are not the ideal way to pay for schools. Property taxes are based on home value. The richer the homes, the higher the taxes, the better the schools. Students in poorer homes in poorer districts tend to have weaker schools. Is there a better way, another type of taxes to pay for schools? Well, Westerville this fall asks voters to approve an income tax hike to help pay for schools in that district. Officials say the income tax would diversify funding sources. The district would not tax retirement earnings, and only residents would pay the increase to their income taxes, not people who work in the Westerville district but live elsewhere. Terry Casey, are income taxes a better choice to pay for schools than property taxes?
Well, the law, as you mentioned, is a little different on school income taxes because businesses don't pay those. People that live outside the municipality but work there don't pay it. And also the history in Ohio, when you look at it, school income taxes have done better in rural areas where farmers see the trade-off and benefit accordingly. But in suburban type areas like Westerville, I think it's going to be uphill because suddenly also a lot of people who are renting will discover they don't realize they're indirectly paying property tax, but suddenly if you're making $50,000, $60,000, you might have an extra $500 to $700 you got to pay. And also for a lot of home people, two people working, it adds up to over $1,000 a year they'd have to pay in income tax. So I think there's a real question whether it'll sell.
Cindy, isn't that more fair than putting all the burden on property taxes? I know that renters, part of their rent goes to the tax that the landlord pays, but still.
I think that, to your point, though, there's a conversation that needs to be had. And I think that the state has handcuffed a lot of cities and even school districts to be able to diversify their revenue. I went to school in D.C. at Howard University, and still to this day, I just went back to D.C. 2 weeks ago, and they have a tax on bags and plastic bags. And so we need to make sure that we're thinking of very new ideas for cities to be able to generate this revenue if we're going to be having this conversation about property tax and also how it affects schools as well.
Westerville asked for a property tax increase last year and it failed. Is this just a way to get the money through a different door?
Well, they're trying, but remember, the municipal school income tax is appealing to seniors because Social Security retirement income is not taxed. But then again, other people, including renters and others, are going to say, wait a minute, why should I pay so much if they're not going to pay?
When you look at the way we pay property taxes, it's kind of hidden. It's hidden in if you have a mortgage, it's hidden in your mortgage bill. I mean, very few people look to see how much goes to interest, how much goes to principal, how much goes to home insurance, how much goes to property taxes. But when you retire and you pay off your mortgage, that's when you get the bill. And that's when you really see what your property tax bill is.
Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a substantial chunk of it. And I think that one of the most sympathetic arguments for property tax reform is the person who's been living in their house for 25, 35, 45 years, and now they're priced out of their long-term home because their property tax bill keeps climbing.
So, but income taxes they're kind of hidden. I mean, if it goes up, like in Westerville, it'll be 0.75%. So you might see a fewer dollars in your paycheck every 2 weeks or every month, but you get used to it, right?
I mean, I guess it's what the voters can stomach at this point because you have, obviously different tax-paying groups are affected by different types of taxes. But I think generally, these schools are going to the ballot more and more often, and these levies are failing more and more often. So I don't know that the type of tax, I do think there's some differentiation, but I think that schools keep going back to voters and asking for more money out of a need or a want, and that is where voters are at.
And in Westerville, a typical couple, each making $75,000 a year, living in those areas, they're going to pay nearly $100 a month more in a school income tax. So 0.75% sounds small, but it does add up because there's a lot of people in that district who are middle income, making money from two persons working, but it's real money.
So I think at the end of the day, voters continue to say, we're tired of the inflation, we're tired of all the high costs, groceries, and what kind of relief can we get?
And this is their chance to speak out and say no.
Well, it's also a chance to we talk all that we're too reliant on property taxes. This is a way to diversify that funding source. That has to be an argument, right?
Well, but then they say, make somebody else pay or tax the rich or tax business. Yeah. And again, on a school income tax, business gets away with no money, whereas they're paying property tax.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's a real thing, too, because I think one part of this debate that probably should not be ignored is that going back to the state legislature now, the state legislature handles school funding. House Republicans would tell you they gave schools the most money they've ever given them, but they also gave a ton of money to private school vouchers. And there's been a real focus and importance on school choice among Republicans, and that's a priority for them. So, public schools may feel that blowback as well.
All right. If you want to really know more about how Ohio pays for schools, where the money goes, if it's spent wisely, WOSU has a new podcast, All Sides Untangled, The Cost of Learning. It's on 89.7 NPR News on the radio Monday mornings at 11. And it's also available as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Time now for our final off-the-record parting shots. And Stanley, you're up first.
All right, mine is easy today. I'm just really enjoying the fact that former Vice President Kamala Harris is being able to be unfiltered and also be able to kind of reap the harvest that she had. I also think that it's really important of a conversation to continue to talk about the Democratic Party and where we are. And I think that, while some folks have not enjoyed her book tour, I think it presents a lot of opportunities for people to have discussions of where the party is.
Sorry.
Saturday night, I was in Ohio Stadium, and I'm happy to report from my eyes, this team, offense and defense, is for real. Saturday, tomorrow, they'll be in Illinois, and when I was a college student way back in the late 60s, was part of Bucket and Dipper and was over in Illinois to exchange the Yellow Buck. This year's the 100th anniversary, and let's hope Ohio State keeps the Yellow Buck and wins.
All right. Sarah.
Laura and I were both at the governor's hemp press conference. We spent a lot of time with the governor as State House reporters. It's always more fun when there are props. So.
Laura.
Agreed. I wrote about a quirky case in front of the Ohio Supreme Court this week that I think could impact a lot of people. And it has to do with when a couple splits, when they divorce or they break up, who gets the pet? And I was surprised to find that Marvin the cat was considered property rather than a beloved member of the family in which a custody agreement could be worked out.
Marvin the cat.
Marvin the cat. So it's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out.
Ohio versus Marvin. Anyway, this week, U.S. Senator Bernie Moreno from Ohio weighed in on the Bad Bunny Super Bowl appearance controversy. He's not a fan. Speaker Mike Johnson has suggested Lee Greenwood should sing at halftime. I have an idea. Bad Bunny should invite Lee Greenwood up on stage, a surprise duet, which happens often at the Super Bowl. Bad Bunny could then sing, "I'm proud to be an American," in Spanish. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Continue our discussion on Facebook. Watch us anytime at our website, YouTube, and the PBS app. For our crew and panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.